Jaime Laredo is one of the world's best-loved violinists. Since winning the Queen Elizabeth competition over 25 years ago, at the age of 17, he has appeared as soloist all over the world. During this time, he has worked with the world's leading orchestras, including the Cleveland, Chicago, Boston, and London Symphony Orchestras, and with many of the greatest conductors, Eugene Ormandy, Leopold Stokowski, and George Szell, to name but a few.
Look at that. It's gorgeous.
As a chamber musician, he is equally popular, and his many successful collaborations have included performances with Pablo Casals, Rostropovich, Rudolf Serkin, Isaac Stern, and Glenn Gould, with whom he has also recorded the complete Bach sonatas. In addition, he devotes about 40 concerts a year to the very popular Kalkstein-Laredo-Robinson trio.
I was born in Cochabamba, Bolivia, South America.
And how old were you when you first started to play the violin?
I was about 6.
And what inspired you to play the violin?
It was my father, really. He was a great music lover, always had music in the home. He played the piano a little bit himself, but mainly had friends playing string quartets and so on. And when I was about 5 and a half, he took me to a string quartet concert. And I loved the concert, and particularly the violin. And so apparently, I don't remember this, but apparently I asked him if I could start taking lessons. And he didn't pay much attention to me, and I kept at it, and I kept always asking him. So finally, one day, I got for Christmas a present, a half-size violin. And I started taking lessons immediately, and apparently I showed, great talent for it. And it was very natural.
And when did you move to the USA?
Shortly thereafter, when I was about 6 and almost 7, my whole family emigrated to San Francisco, California.
And who were your first teachers?
My first teacher was in Bolivia. His name was Carlo Flamini. He was an Italian by birth, but educated and from Vienna. And he was a refugee during the war. Then in San Francisco, I studied with Antonio de Grassi, and then later with Frank Hauser, who was the concertmaster of the San Francisco Symphony.
And can you remember your first concert, your formal debut?
Very well indeed. I played quite a few concerts and short little recitals and things when I was 7, 8, 9, and so on. But my first big concert was when I was 11. We were soloists with the San Francisco Symphony.
Do you remember what you played then?
Oh yes, very well. The introduction in Rondo Capriccioso of Saint-Saëns.
Gosh.
Yes.
These early successes led Jaime Laredo to become a national hero in his native Bolivia, and he is perhaps the only violinist to have had a series of postage stamps issued in his honor, as well as a national stadium named after him.
Jamie, I always feel that masterclasses tend to concentrate on the problems one particular student is having with one particular piece. We would like to take a new approach by focusing on the general principles involved in preparing different types of piece for performance. You've chosen 3 pieces for us to illustrate this. Can you tell us what they are?
Yeah, well, first the E major partita of Bach for solo violin, and then the first movement of the F major Beethoven violin piano sonata, known as the Spring Sonata, and then the last virtuoso showpiece, which I really love, the Recitative and Scherzo by Fritz Kreisler, which is again for solo violin.
So the first piece, let's talk about the first piece now, which is the Bach Unaccompanied Sonata. You've played it many times before. If you were approaching it for the first time, what would you look for? How would you go about it?
Well, actually, as I would with any piece that I've never played, which is, first of all, to try and get the notes. Try and figure out the notes and learn them and get acquainted and so on. Then I begin to really look at what each movement is about. In this case, it's actually quite simple because it's a partita in 6 movements, and they're dance-like movements. And so I try to think to myself and what is my opinion and what I feel about each movement. And so, for instance, let's just take each movement at a time. Now, the first movement is it's a prelude. And to me, it's a very fiery, stormy, sort of marvelous movement, which is and so on, which goes on and on and on. Then the second movement is lure, which is it's a slow but still dance-like movement. So on. Then we have a gavotte in rondo form, which is the main theme, which keeps reoccurring throughout the movement. Then we have 2 wonderful minuets. The first is sort of very elegant, very dance-like. And the second, again a minuet, but sort of a very sad. And so on. To me, this particular movement has a very sad, melancholy sort of feeling. Then comes a wonderful bourrée, which is, I think of as a very sort of heavy peasant dance-like. And so on. And then the last movement is a gigue. So, I try to think in my mind and analyze what each movement is all about, what it means to me, and slowly this is how I get acquainted.
Do you use a different sort of intonation when you're playing unaccompanied as opposed to with an orchestra or piano?
Well, it enables me to exaggerate a little bit, or I should say to take advantage of what we have with the violin. Since in the piano, the intonation is there for us. There's nothing we can do about it. C sharp and a D flat is exactly the same note, the same pitch. But in the violin, thank goodness, it's not. And I find that we can do much more with it. For instance, let's say a C sharp. I will go from the A to the C sharp, which is really quite high. Now I'll go to that same note, but call it a D flat, going from a B flat. You see, it is definitely flatter. So, and I find that this can make playing much more expressive.
And vibrato, again a means for expression. A lot of people aren't using it now in Baroque playing. What do you feel about that?
Well, I'm afraid that I am not one of this new generation, of going back to the Baroque style and so on. I think there are a lot of very good things about it, but I do believe in vibrato up to a certain point. Now, certainly, you can't overdo it. Now, let's take a piece like the second movement of the E major, the lure. I use as little vibrato as possible, only to give it expression and life. I certainly wouldn't play, this is like playing some Brahms or something. So I think that it's very much dependent on what you're playing, but I think it does need, for me anyways, some life.
nerve-wracking playing in front of audiences which always expect you to play brilliantly?
It's always hard, of course, and nerves is something that don't go away. That's the one thing, even with all the years of playing and experience, it does not disappear. It's always there with you, and it's part of life, and something that we have to learn to live with, and through experience we learn how to hide it and how to cope with it.
Can you think back on any specific high points in your career?
Well, probably the most important thing that happened to me in the beginning of my career, when I was 17 years old. I won first prize in the Queen Elizabeth of Belgium competition, and that started me out.
Could you tell us a little bit about that competition?
Well, it was, that was first of all, my first bout with real nerves. It was difficult. There were a lot of tremendous young violinists there, and the jury was quite distinguished. There was Menuhin and Oistrakh, Grumio, Francescatti, Seghetti, to name just a few. And believe me, to walk out on the stage and to see these great idols of mine sitting there in the very first row was quite frightening. And I thought to myself later, well, if I can go through this, I can go through anything. Little did I know that was only the beginning.
And since that time, you've worked with a lot of great musicians.
Yes, well, I would say highlights of my life where I've been extremely fortunate in being able to work with some of the greatest musicians of our time, really. First of all, I worked with conductors such as George Zell and Stokowski and Charles Munch and Ormandy, all who are gone now. And as instrumentalists, I've had the opportunity to work with Pablo Casals, who was probably one of the greatest musical influences on my life, really. I worked with him both as a conductor and playing chamber music with him. That was something that will live with me forever, really. And people like Rudolf Zirkin, Isaac Stern, Rostropovich, a lot of great. I've been very fortunate, really, in working.
And teachers the same?
Yes, well, I mentioned some of my earlier teachers, but my two last teachers were Joseph Gingold and Ivan Galamian, two of the greatest violin teachers in the world, really.
You've often worked together, especially with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Could you now give us an idea how you would solve some of the problems encountered in playing duo sonatas? Peter, perhaps you'd like to start first. Are there any specific problems in playing with a violin?
Well, there are remarkably few problems when one's playing with a violinist of the quality of Jaime. There, of course, are certain problems inherent in the very different nature of the instruments. One has the violin, which is a very singing instrument capable of sustaining beautiful melodies. The piano, after all, is a percussion instrument, and you very often have to disguise its true nature when you're playing sustained melodies, when you have certain kinds of sustained writing.
What about ensemble, Jaime? I mean, how do you achieve good ensemble?
Sometimes it can be difficult, and sometimes if you are playing with a pianist that you don't really, see eye to eye, or you have different feelings about the music, then you have to work out every little detail. For instance, today we had no problem. The first time we read through the piece was like we played it, many times before together. And also, I just want to add one thing to what Peter was saying, that yes, the piano certainly is a percussion instrument. The violin, by its nature, is a singing legato instrument, but Peter makes the piano sound like a string instrument, which is there are not too many pianists that can do that. I think it's remarkable.
Just one thing about how you keep together. Do you need the eye contact? I mean, one of the problems with playing the violin is, of course, you actually face away from the piano when you actually perform to an audience. Yes. How do you...
Well, even if I had my back to Peter, it's always very natural to do... You see, all it takes is just a little nod, and of course he's aware of it. He's aware of what I'm doing.
What about balance, dynamics? You have the problem that there's no one in the audience. You're working in a concert hall that perhaps you don't know. The relative sound of the two instruments, the dynamics that the two instruments can produce are very, very different. Obviously, any piano can drown out any violin if it wants to. How do you judge whether the two are balancing out well?
Well, I think that more than anything, it's experience, don't you? I mean,
Absolutely. I think it is a question of experience, of different acoustics. And actually, I find that with a violin, there isn't usually too much of a balance problem. The violin, after all, is a bright, high instrument.
it is with some pianists.
I find actually sometimes a greater problem with the lower lying stringed instruments, cello and viola in particular. You have to be particularly careful when they're playing on the bottom strings that one's not covering.
So where you've got a lot of chords, for instance, I'm thinking of the C major section where you got the piano.
Yes.
Surely there is a huge danger of completely covering what the violin is doing.
Well, there is a danger, I think, yes. It depends on the size of the crescendo one makes here. Perhaps I just play this on my own. Shall we play that together?
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. Now let's show him if you wanted to drown me out.
Well, indeed, one might have a situation, I suppose.
Point taken.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of considerations here. I mean, one of the things, for example, is pedaling. I mean, obviously, if one pedaled right through those two bars, one would have an accumulation of sound, which would be too much. And I think, in fact, un-Beethovenian. In fact, Beethoven himself has really given the clue by marking the second time the crescendo not to a sforzando, but just to a forte piano. Not a fortissimo, you see. So a lot of it's in the music in any case.
I think what you said about pedaling is so true and very important, because so many pianists in playing chamber music or with other string instruments tend to over pedal, and that is really where the strings simply don't have a chance anymore.
You mentioned before about phrasing, the different qualities of the two instruments. One is a very singing instrument, the other is a percussion instrument. Do you try and match the two sounds up ever? Do you ever try and copy the violin? Jamie, do you ever try and copy the piano?
Oh, absolutely. There are times when I try very hard to sound like a piano, to make the violin a little bit percussive. And there are times, particularly in this piece, where the piano really must sound very legato.
Absolutely. The very opening of the piece, there are two clear examples of this. First of all, the piano, I think, has to imitate the kind of long bow for the accompaniment figure. This mustn't sound at all percussive. Equally in the theme, one doesn't want a kind of feeling of you beating time. It's got to sound like a phrase again. It is, of course, still an illusion. I mean, one has long notes there which have a built-in diminuendo, and it's still got to sound like part of the phrase.
Jamie, what are your feelings on that? I mean, what you said you would sometimes try and sound like a piano.
Yeah, well, there are things, for instance, when I try to do things like this, to try and imitate the piano.
I suppose it's very similar to phrasing, but articulation is also a problem. We have notes very often with a dot on them.
Yes.
What exactly do you understand by dots?
Well, a dot can mean 100 things in music, really. Sometimes a dot means, yes, short. How short? Very short. Not so short.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means simply pauses between the notes, separation of the notes. That is something you have to interpret what you feel or what you think the composer wants. Now, for instance, the very last note of this piece has a dot on it. Yet, if we were to play it as a very short dot and play it like, you know, it would be terrible. You have to play it, which is still short, but the notes still raise.
Yes.
Could you just show us together how you finish that last note? I mean,
Well, perhaps the last three.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. I think there's a great danger, actually, and showed very much there of the piano playing that too short.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, the violin has the chord, and that needs a little time just to sound.
Yeah.
And so maybe, you know, that'll may well be one of our rehearsal points to agree on that that particular feature. Of course, this question of the being many different kinds of dots is absolutely right. I mean, a staccato crotchet is obviously different from a staccato quaver, or quarter note and eighth note, if you will. And you also have occasions when there's a slur over a series of dots. We have this at one point in the movement where we're playing together and answering each other. Those have dots over the top, but there's also a slur. So
Now that's an example where you could play those, or somewhere in the middle. Yeah, any number of ways.
one of the notorious places, and this is perhaps an unkind thing to do to you both, in this first movement, is a trill passage leading up into the recapitulation.
Yes.
How would you actually work at getting that right? Is there any way of making sure whatever
Well,
happens?
again, that's the sort of place that you can rehearse 20 times, 50 times, then you come to the performance and it's not together at all. Now, we were doing it this morning, and it was just, it went, very, very well. I think if you feel it, and of course you must play it together a few times, but if you really feel the direction of the music, then there's really no problem.
Jamie, just one last thing. We discussed earlier intonation in an unaccompanied piece. I'm wondering whether you actually change the way you play when you're playing with the piano.
I don't consciously change. I don't say to myself, well, now I'm going to play with piano, so therefore forget everything that I believe in intonation. Because I do believe very much in, as we were talking earlier about the kind of intonation with high leading tone and so on. However, I am careful not to exaggerate too much and not to make the leading tones too high, whereas if we're playing, let's say, a G sharp together, my G sharp would be so much higher than the piano that it would actually hurt the listener.
Yeah.
So I am a little bit careful of that.
Jaime, you've shown us how you go about preparing different styles of music for performance. Can we now talk a little bit about the technique of playing the violin?
Sure.
What are your thoughts about the different schools of violin playing that there are? Is there one way which is the way to play, or are there lots of different ways of playing the violin successfully?
There are thousands of ways. First of all, there is no such thing as the correct way. It's what works for the individual. Although we know of the names of the Franco-Belgian school, the Russian school, these are basically, to me, really a name. There was a particular way of supposedly of holding the bow and so on. But let's take the Russian school, which the most famous teacher was Leopold Auer, and out of this school came Jascha Heifetz, Nathan Milstein, Ephraim Zimbalist, Misha Elman, endless others. Some of the greatest violinists that the world has ever known. Yet, now they came out of one school, yet every one plays completely different. They hold the violin and the bow in different manners, produce completely different types of sounds, sonorities, everything. So it boils down to the individual. And this also, to me, is the sign of a great teacher, one who lets the individual come through.
Yeah. Would you say this is something that, I know your teacher, you had Galamian and Gingold, that they both could do?
Yes, I must say I was very fortunate in having worked with two of the greatest teachers of this century, Joseph Gingold, Ivan Galamian. And I was encouraged by both. I was very much left alone, really. I mean, obviously, I had bad habits. I still have bad habits. And any good teacher will try to correct those habits. But they both very much left me alone and to find things out for myself. And I think I was very grateful for that.
Is there any one player you can single out as being the greatest musician or greatest violinist of the century?
Well, for me, that's a very easy answer. That would have to be Heifetz. Again, it's a personal feeling. I feel that there are many great violinists. There are many people whose playing I adore today. Milstein, Isaac Stern, David Oistrakh, who died, unfortunately, a few years ago. But you speak about many or all of these great violinists, and then somehow standing above is Jascha Heifetz. Just for sheer mastery of the violin. I really believe that we probably won't ever see anything like that again.
Well, having talked a little about the various schools of violin playing that there are or weren't there, perhaps, can you just show us a little bit how you approach playing?
Yes, well, again, I always start with my way of doing it. I try, first of all, to be as relaxed as I can when I play, and that is in holding the violin, in holding the bow. I try very hard not to ever grip the bow very tightly, because then this just sort of kills the sound. I try not to grip, the violin very tightly. So the important thing is to be as relaxed as possible. In the manner that I hold the bow, I try to distribute my fingers more or less evenly, so that the weight is distributed quite well. I actually have a habit, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. I tend to hold the bow a little higher than most people. Most people will put their thumb, right here. I have a tendency to sort of come up here. But again, it works for me. I'm comfortable, and I feel very loose and relaxed.
And one of the problems a lot of people have with playing is when they try and play off the string notes. Now, we talked a little about this before. Can you just give a demonstration of the various ways you can play lifted strokes, let's call them lifted?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, one of the most important of all is the spiccato. And a spiccato can be many, many different speeds. Like, let's take some examples. For instance, the very fastest would be something like the Fifth Paganini Caprice, which goes... That's quite fast. And at that speed, the bow is actually hardly leaving the string. In other words, to demonstrate slowly, I'm not really doing this, but I'm so close to the string that it's hardly leaving the string. Then, let's say something like the last movement of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. That is a slower kind of spiccato, which is, of course, mixed with legato, but that really is off the string. Now, that completely leaves. Then, in the same piece, later on, where it's spiccato, but all on the same bowing, all up bows, for instance. It's very important to be very, very relaxed.
What about a slower sort of spiccato, perhaps something like the Mozart Fourth Concerto?
Yeah, well, you're talking about something short. It's not really spiccato. It's a more staccato stroke, something like where the bow it does leave the string.
But the fundamental difference is for the spiccato, the faster stroke, you're relaxed, and the other, you don't perhaps let the fingers go freely.
That's right. Well, spiccato is for me a combination of fingers of this and of wrist. So it's now in the slower, it's a little bit tighter. It's more wrist here.
Jamie, all the pieces you've played today are very different, as we mentioned before. There's a wide range of tonal colour you've produced. Can you just show us a little bit how you managed to achieve that?
Well, one of the important things for me, one of the most important things in violin playing is the use of the vibrato. Now, for instance, to, let's say, use this kind of vibrato that I use at the beginning of the Beethoven Sprech Sonata, which is a very slow, slow singing. Now, if I were to use, for that beginning, the kind of vibrato that I would use for the beginning of the Kreisler Recitative Scherzo, it would sound rather ridiculous, because it would sound like, you see?
Yeah.
So it's by varying the speeds of the vibrato that you achieve the different sonorities.
Yeah.
Then, of course, I mean, this is in combination with what I do with the bow. There are times where, for something like the beginning of the Kreisler, where it's very, I want a very exciting kind of a sound, so I will give quite a lot of pressure with the bow. I'm close to the bridge and I'm really digging into the string. Yeah. Whereas for the Beethoven, it's very light sort of bow and not quite so close to the string.
One question related to vibrato I wanted to ask. There's a lot of violin teachers who say you must only do a wrist vibrato, you must only do an arm vibrato. Again, have you...
Well, again, this is something that what works for you. Now, I was very lucky. I never had to learn vibrato. I seem to have just naturally, it was there. So I was very lucky. Some people I know have to work very hard on the vibrato because they either start off with the too slow, wobbly type of this, or too sort of a fast, hysterical sound. So they have to work on it. To me, again, it's a question of feeling relaxed, and if you feel there, just to have a very relaxed left hand, and for me, it's mostly wrist.
Standing so close to you, Jamie, I notice how strong your fingers are. I mean, I can even hear them. Is that something you've worked hard to produce, or...?
Well, no, I haven't consciously worked hard. I think this is something that comes naturally from years and years and years of playing the violin and the constant, exercising daily. If I were to go to a table and tap with both my left and my right hand, I think you would notice that my left hand is probably about 3 or 4 times as strong as my right. But it's not something that I do consciously when I'm playing. I'm not trying to do that because I actually believe that creates some tension. Now, of course, you have to have a certain feeling of strength. You can't just sort of lightly put the finger on the string because then you really get no sound.
One thing that terrifies most violinists, I include myself amongst those, is changing position. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you approach position changing.
Well, again, to try to feel the hand completely relaxed. I do practice sometimes when I have a hard, I call them shifts, when I have a difficult shift, or any shift, to just practice very slowly. Let's say I want to go here, right? So to practice it in this method, to just very slowly and feel, as I'm still playing the previous note, I feel my whole hand beginning to make the whole shift.
Are there any terrifying shifts that you find? Are there any really difficult ones which you can think of? Perhaps demonstrate.
Well, I mean, they're all terrifying. If you want to do something like that,
yeah.
Of course, and that's something that you have to practice an awful lot, until it's almost automatic. Your hand will automatically go to the right, to the right number.
Do you practice a lot still, or is that something that you've left out of your youth? Or?
Oh, you must be kidding. No, I do practice. I sometimes don't get to practice as much as I would like to, because when I'm traveling and touring and all that, it's difficult.
Yeah.
But yes, I do practice it. For me, ideal would be if I could practice 3 hours every day of my life. That would be ideal.
And do you practice scales and studies, or do you concentrate mainly on pieces now?
Occasionally, for instance, in the summer months, when I do take quite a bit of time off from concertizing and from traveling, I do go back to playing scale, 3-octave scales and arpeggios and scales and thirds and so on, and I find it's wonderful. It's a catharsis. It really is.
Yeah.
During the year, I must confess, I don't really have the time. So what I do, I will take whatever piece I'm playing at the time, and I sort of make that as an etude. Now, for instance, let's say if I'm happen to be playing E major Bach partita or something, I'll use the preludium, the first movement, this as an etude, and I'll just practice it very slowly, and I'll do it in détaché, like I'll do it spiccato, like this, or I'll play the whole first movement down this part of the bow. Only using the frog, so things like that. So I try to sort of make little games for myself.
Yeah. Double stopping is a feature of a violin player, which again presents a lot of problems for people. Any tips that you can give us?
Well, what's difficult about double stopping, of course, is that let's take something like the 9th Paganini Caprice, E major. First of all, naturally, what's difficult is for intonation, to play it in tune. And that, of course, is surely only very slow practicing. But another thing is that sometimes it's difficult to have exactly the same balance on both strings. Sometimes one note will stick out more, and to get the proper balance of where you have the same pressure on both strings.
Yeah.
That's difficult. And then what adds to the difficulty sometimes is when you have fifths. Sometimes that's very hard to do on the violin, because if your string happens to be slightly false, then it makes it almost impossible to play fifths.
Yeah.
So that's another added trouble.
Jamie, there are a few techniques we haven't sort of covered yet, and perhaps if you just give us a short demonstration of how you would approach them. We mentioned spiccato, but not across the string spiccato. I'm thinking of a passage like in the Mendelssohn.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, the best example is the end of the cadenza of the Mendelssohn going into where you go. case like that, as I mentioned earlier in spiccato, the bow is actually hardly leaving the string. If I were to practice it slowly, it would be from quite high. So it's very much leaving the string. But if I do it in tempo, it's almost not leaving the string at all.
Yeah. And that's how you practice it, just
Yes, I do practice it so that I try to control every note.
Pizzicato is a problem a lot of people.
Pizzicato, yes. Well, the normal pizzicato. Now, what I do, if it's a rather something slow, I always keep my thumb here, so I have some support. If it's something terribly fast, then I have to, release. Then, of course, there's left-hand pizzicato, which is sometimes harder with something like which is one of the variations in
Could
the
you just
24th.
Perhaps very slowly
Very
just
slow,
show us
yes.
what exactly it is?
Yes, well, the first note, of course, is hit with the bow. Then, all it is that each following note is being plucked by the the last finger that I'm playing with.
Yeah.
That is just purely pretty much a trick.
Harmonics.
Harmonics. Yes, well, there's the natural harmonics. Then
Which are produced
naturally just by putting the finger down without any pressure. In other words, just lightly touching the string, not giving any pressure at all. Then the false harmonic, which are by putting the finger down here with pressure and then and so on.
How much sliding do you do between position changes?
Well, it depends what I want, and also the type of slide. Let's take a more subtle one, something like at the very beginning of the slow movement of the Bruch G minor concerto, where I go. Now that is sort of a subtle, what I call over slide. Now you could do that by an underslide, sliding into the note, or you could simply, no slide at all. So that depends on what you want to do.
We've talked a lot about all sorts of different kinds of technique that many people spend hours and hours trying to master. Do people get too obsessed with technique, do you think?
I'm afraid we all tend to do that, and the important thing is we must remember that as difficult as it is to play the violin, that all these technical things we're talking about are purely a means to an end, which is to make music.
One thing I haven't mentioned at all is the help you were given by your companion there. Could you tell us a little bit about
my baby? Yes, well, this is a very beautiful Stradivarius, made in 1717. I've had this violin since 1969, and it goes everywhere with me, lives with me. And I am indeed fortunate because it's a beautiful, beautiful specimen. It's in marvelous condition and has a wonderful carrying power, really everything that a great violin needs. The only thing is that owning a treasure like this is quite a responsibility because, I feel like it's mine to guard and take care of, and I'm fortunate that I have some very wonderful people to help me take care of it. When I'm in the United States, I take it to René Morel, who works for Jacques Francais, violin dealer, and he looks after it. And on this side of the Atlantic, my good friend Charles Beer. So it's in good hands.
You travel all around the world. What problems do you encounter combining traveling and performing?
Well, quite a few. It's very difficult. It's a very tiring life. And I think probably the worst thing of all, for me anyway, is jet lag. Very often I find myself flying, let's say, from New York to London, and the very next day I'll have a rehearsal or two rehearsals or sometimes even a concert. And that's very difficult on the body and the mind, believe me.
And the violin as well?
Well, the difficult thing on the violin is the changes of weather. You know, it's happened to me that I will go from, let's say, a place in the United States, such as Arizona, where it's desert, completely dry, to a very, very wet climate, and, you know, the poor violin really suffers.
I know your wife, Sharon Robinson, is a cellist. Do you ever get the opportunity to perform together?
Oh, yes. Fortunately, we do quite a lot of playing together, not only with orchestras playing works like a Brahms double, but we also have a trio with the wonderful Israeli pianist Joseph Kallichstein, and we do probably 40, 50 concerts a year. So we do have a chance to travel together, which makes life so much nicer, because otherwise we would be apart practically, you know, the whole year.
Leading the life that you do, a great soloist, great performer, are there problems with family life sometimes, fitting the family in?
Oh, it's very difficult, because even though I can do a lot of traveling and playing with my wife, my daughter is in school now. She's 16, and she can't very well just leave school for a few weeks and go on trips with me. So there are times when I'm away for many, many weeks and away from her, and it's very difficult. Thank God for the telephone, that's all I can say. But it's difficult.
You are unusual amongst violinists in that you have a very wide range of musical activities. Can you tell us how far they extend so far in your career?
I've never been content really only being a violin soloist. Somehow it was a wonderful life, but it was not enough for me. And although I love to play concertos and I love to play recitals, I wanted a more variety in my life, in my musical life. And so I've always played a lot of chamber music, and in recent years I've started to do a lot of playing, conducting with, you know, many chamber orchestras, but particularly with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which is an orchestra that I really love dearly, and we've done an awful lot of work together. We've done many tours and recordings and great concerts, many concerts, I mean, and it's been a wonderful experience.
The final piece we're going to look at is the Recitativo and Scherzo by Kreisler. You've already mentioned that this is one of your favorite pieces.
It is.
Can you
really
tell us why it's such a good showpiece?
Well, it's a marvelous either encore piece, particularly if you're playing solos with orchestra, or it's a piece that fits really in any recital program, and it has everything for the violin. The first part, the recitative, has wonderful, you're able to sing and play on the G string. The second part, the scherzo, has all the fast spiccato and the double stops and octaves and harmonics. I mean, just, you know, he uses all the so-called tricks.
Yeah. Most of us have heard records of Kreisler playing his own music. Are you ever influenced by those?
Oh, you'd have to be, yes. Many people have asked me, do you try to copy it? And of course I don't. First of all, you can't copy Kreisler. But I can't help but be influenced by that marvelous rhythm, the sound, and also the fact that he played most of his compositions, anyway, a lot slower than people do today. And I like them much better, quite frankly.
In what ways have recital programs changed since Kreisler's day?
Well, I think that recital programs today are much more serious, tend to be, and more, much heavier, big weighty pieces. A typical program in Kreisler's day would have been for a violinist to come out and play a Baroque sonata, and then they would play a concerto with piano, actually, which today, you know, is unheard of. And then the entire second half usually was short pieces, which today we would only, you know, play as encores. And whereas today the programs usually consist of 3 or 4 big sonatas, occasionally Bach unaccompanied or something, which is wonderful. I think that a lot of today's programs are, you know, great music, and you hear a lot more new music and so on. But I do miss occasionally the shorter works, the wonderful, you know, Kreisler pieces and Wieniawski pieces and so on. And I certainly think that there is a place for them in the violin repertoire. and I enjoy playing them, and I would like to hear more of them today.
pressure being one of the best is difficult to take in any sphere of life. And you've, over 25 years since you won the Queen Elizabeth competition, and you've been at the top ever since. Do you ever wish you were doing something slightly less in the public eye?
From time to time, I do think how nice it would be to stop all this running around, traveling, pressure concerts, and to move to our house in Vermont with my daughter and my wife and just work in the garden. And I think what a happy life that would be. But then I think about it for a few minutes and I think it would be great for about 6 months, but then I would miss the other life so much. I know I couldn't stay away from it.
For centuries, the Soho district of London has had an unparalleled reputation as a centre for the restoration and sale of fine violins. The firm of John and Arthur Beer was founded here in the last century and is now recognised as London's leading violin dealer. Their present director, Charles Beer, is one of the world's best-known authorities on the restoration and appraisal of stringed instruments.
First of all, Charles, could you tell us a little bit about how the violin works?
Yes, I'll try. The violin is made of two different types of wood, a hardwood, which is usually maple, for the back, the sides and the scroll, and a softwood, usually spruce, for the front. And the strings pass over the bridge across the front, so that the instrument is squeezed from each end and also pressed down on through the bridge. And these pressures it has to resist, partly through its construction, which is an arched form, hollowed out on the inside, and partly through the pressure of the bridge is resisted by, under the bass foot, the bass bar, which is a spring glued to the inside of the front. And on the treble side, the sound post, which is a little cylinder of wood that extends just behind the bridge on the front from there and transmits the vibrations from the bridge directly to the back, which then responds in the form of a diaphragm to project the sound out through the sound holes towards your audience.
And how can climatic conditions affect an instrument?
Well, but the thing is that wood is very responsive to changes in humidity. And if you've got a very wet climate, the wood will absorb a lot of the moisture in the air, and the sound can become soggy. Also, the wood will tend to expand, and the pressure from the neck will expand the part underneath the fingerboard, and sometimes the fingerboard will go down and the strings will seem very high above the fingerboard, and it'll make the instrument difficult to play. On the other hand, if you go to a dry place, such as any hotel in the United States of America in winter, the opposite will happen. The wood will shrink, and the shrinking of the front will force the neck back, so that you'll be quite likely to arrive at your destination and find that the strings are lying along the fingerboard and you can't play the instrument at all. You'll also find, even if that doesn't happen, that the sandpost, the fitting of the sandpost, because it's fitted very carefully between the front and the back, will become marginally tighter because of the two plates contracting, and you might, as a result of that, get a loss of vibration or a squeak or any sort of thing. The humidity factor is actually very critical. I think it's a good idea, if you do a lot of travelling, to have a little hygrometer, which is a gauge that will show you what the humidity in the air is at any given moment. And I think the ideal humidity is probably 55, 50, up to 60%. In New York in the summer, for instance, it will quite often be up in the 90s. And it's then necessary over there to have a wedge underneath the fingerboard which will help to guard against accidents. I've heard of people having silica gel crystals, a little bag of them, in their violin case to absorb excess humidity in the case. Also, the other thing is that these instruments are glued together with animal glue. The reason for that, we don't use these permanent and new-fashioned glues because the violin making and repairing trade considers that any glue you use, you should be able to undo. So we use animal glue that is washable away with hot water. So that again obviously absorbs the humidity, and if there is no humidity, if it's too dry, then the glue will dry out. And most of the problems that are encountered by violinists and cellists are in one way or another to do with variations in humidity.
And if there's an excessively dry climate, what can we do about that? Are there anything we can buy? Or?
Well, I quite often tell travelling musicians to leave the violin in the bathroom overnight, or the cello, and that works wonders if the hotel is really dry. On a smaller scale, there is a thing called a dampit, which you can place inside the instrument. It's really just a tube with an absorbent material inside it that you hold under water for 30 seconds and just dry off roughly, and that can then be inserted into the instrument through the sound hole, and it will produce a degree of humidity inside the instrument. It's a good idea, but in extreme cases you probably need to reload the dampit several times a day. There are some more sophisticated gadgets under development, and I think the cost is going to be a factor with some of them, but there's no simple way of doing it. I've heard of people doing it with a potato cut in half. That also works and put in the case.
How do you solve the problem of the sudden appearance of buzzing or rattling noises in the instrument?
Well, buzzing or rattling is usually when the instrument has been in a dry place and the glue somewhere has come undone. The violin is made up of about 80-something pieces of wood, and they're all joined together with this animal glue. And you've only, for instance, got to have a tiny little section of the purfling unglued just along on that spot there, and you will have a very loud buzz indeed, especially on your lower strings. In fact, it'll be so loud that musicians tend to think that the bass bar has probably fallen out. In fact, the loudest of all is usually a little tiny bit of purfling just there. But I think you need I think if you do have a loud buzz suddenly and your bridge is straight, because obviously if the bridge is leaning forward or not quite touching, you can get a buzz. If everything sort of looks superficially okay, then it's a question of taking it to a violin maker who usually will know what to look for.
Should an instrument be overhauled regularly?
I think it's a good idea to have an instrument, even in a good climate like London. It's probably a good idea to have violin checked over properly once a year. In America and in Germany, places where it tends to be very dry, probably twice or even 3 times a year, just a quick check over is a good idea. The fingerboard, which is made of ebony, which is the hardest wood you can get, that will probably need the ruts planing out of it. It'll probably need the ruts planing out of it every 2 or 3 years, depending how often you use it. And that would be a standard part of any overhaul, would be to check over that didn't need doing. Pegs, again, need just a little bit of attention once in a while, especially if they've been in a dry climate, because being of wood, again, they will also contract and expand and work more or less well. But I think realizing this problem with the humidity, I think a violinist has got to realize that his instrument is almost never going to sound the same from one day to the next. There'll be good days and bad days, or good weeks and bad weeks, and quite often if it's a little bit off colour, it probably isn't anything to worry about. But if a buzz develops or if there's a sort of loss of power, then it's worth having it checked over, even if you only had it done last week.
Is there any way of protecting the vulnerable parts of violin and bow?
You don't usually have to worry unless you're a very sweaty person. Sometimes it's necessary to have the area of the shoulder revarnished with a rather harder varnish than is applied to the rest of the instrument. In extreme cases, you could put on a type of Scotch tape, but you have to be very careful. It's quite difficult to fit, and you have to be very careful taking it off. That's probably best done by a violin maker, both ways. There's not much else that actually can go wrong through ordinary use, except that if you use a shoulder rest, you must change the rubber of the shoulder rest about every year or two, because the rubber gets harder and harder. And we see horrendous damage done to instruments even by Stradivari the other day, where the rubber has got so hard that it's worn the wood away, and certainly it makes unsightly holes in the original varnish, which isn't very good either. It's absolutely vital to change the rubbers. Otherwise, it should all be okay.
And the bow?
The bow, again, a very sweaty hand. It's sometimes quite a good idea to put a little Scotch tape over the handle part, just to protect it, and to protect the maker's name, which is usually branded there. On very fragile, very old, very valuable bows, every now and then people get a new replacement frog and button made so as to preserve the original without further wear.
How often should a bow be rehaired?
Well, Isaac Stern has his done about 3 times a week, I think. But given good quality hair, most professional violinists probably need a rehair every 3 or 4 months for their favourite bow. Other people, maybe a year. The hair gradually either lengthens or loses its grip, and that's the moment when you have to do it. The hair has a knot at each end that's bound together with thread and fixed with rosin, and that is fitted into the head of the bow and obviously into the frog, and it's actually a very highly skilled job to get that hair so that a performer really enjoys using it. But the secret is to have an even band of hair that's a completely flat ribbon, and if you just look down it like that against the light, you can usually see if the hairs are all going crisscross or if they're straight. But the standard of rehairing at the moment is probably quite high in the major cities, but you have to be very careful who you do give a valuable bow to, because one little crack in the side of the head because the wedge is too tight, and you've lost 9/10 of the value of the bow.
You talked earlier about the sound post in relation to the bridge and the F-holes. How important is it to set up the instrument correctly so that these are all correctly aligned?
Well, the better the instrument is, the more significant that last final adjustment becomes. It is very important to have the neck, the bridge, the end button where the tail gut goes round, to have all that in a straight line down the middle of the instrument. If there's a dog leg over the bridge, that will immediately impede the free sounding of the instrument itself. So far as the bridge position goes, the minutest variation in that can affect the sound. And also the minutest variation in the positioning of the sound post. The thing is that it actually is very difficult and a lengthy process sometimes to find the ideal position for the bridge and the sound post in relation to the instrument, in relation to each other. But once they've arrived there, it is, I think, very advisable to leave them there, if that's at all possible, to keep the same setup, because the instrument, as well as you yourself, will get used to a certain setup. And 9 times out of 10, when you think the instrument is out of adjustment, it's some sort of question of humidity. Either the instrument's come unglued somewhere, or something else has happened that has nothing to do with the position of bridge and sound post. Misha Elman used to go to every single violin maker in the world And he used to come into our shop and everybody else's and say, "Is my sound post in the right position?" And just about everybody used to say no and move it. And you can imagine that poor violin. The sound post practically wore a hole through the front. And that didn't do him any good, but the rest of the instrument was invariably falling to pieces.
What about using cleaners? Is polishing and cleaning a good idea?
Most cleaners that are sold over the counters of violin shops are harmless. There have been one or two over the years that have not been harmless, either because they've built up gradually into a sticky mass if they're overused, or because they contain some solvent that is perhaps perfectly safe on a French-made factory instrument, but there was a bottle of stuff that removed all the varnish from the front of a Stradivari a few years ago in America. And it's best to be a little bit cautious. If you do use a cleaner out of a bottle, a very little of it usually suffices, and they nearly all contain some form of oil, mineral oil, linseed oil, some sort of oil. And if you've got a violin which is quite cracked, and the cracks don't look too happy, maybe they haven't been cleaned out and restored properly for a number of years, then it's certainly best not to approach them with oil, because the oil obviously will penetrate into the crack and gradually unglue it, and not only that, make it very difficult to glue up again. It's best probably to have the violin cleaned slightly as part of the general overhaul. But if you have a valuable instrument, I'm very much against this French polishing that American shops do by habit, because all American violinists seem to want their violin to be incredibly shiny. And that's not the natural look of an Italian instrument or of great varnish. And I think that's a bad habit that's grown up in the last 30, 40 years.
Is there a correct way to put on a string?
Well, I think there is a sensible procedure for putting on a new string, which I'll just run through. The chances are that the peg isn't working perfectly all the time, and there is some stuff called peg paste, which is sort of a brown, comes in the form of a lipstick, really, and taking the peg out, you should just apply that where it touches the peg box walls. That will just give it a bit of lubrication and a bit of friction at the same time. I think the vital thing that people don't terribly often realize is the need to lubricate the groove in the top of the bridge and the groove in the top nut. And that's best done with a piece of good old-fashioned dry kitchen soap. Just a little bit. Soap, I think, is better than graphite from a pencil, but graphite from a pencil is certainly adequate as a rule. The reason for doing that is that when you tune a string, if there isn't any lubrication, for instance, in the top nut, the string won't run easily through. There'll be too much friction there. And by the time you've got the vibrating part of the string in tune, you'll have an unnaturally high tension in the peg box. Now, that'll have one of two effects. Either the string will break, and sometimes you get a series of strings breaking one after the other, and you return them with a complaint to the violin maker that your strings are always breaking in the peg box, and that is invariably a question of lubrication. But the other thing that can happen is when you finally do start to play, you finally get it in tune, and as soon as you start playing, then the disparity between the tension in the peg box and on the vibrating string length will sort itself out, and within a matter of seconds your string will be out of tune, with all that that entails. So far as actually putting the string in the peg goes, I think the advisable way to do it is put a short tail through the hole, not very much extending out the other side, and then if you turn it one turn towards the head of the peg and then across, one turn the other side of the tail of the string, and then against the peg box wall, that will have the effect, as the tension comes up, of tightening the peg so that it won't slip, and you don't have to force it in, which quite often you do have to do.
Is there a direct correlation between the value of an instrument and how it sounds?
Yes, I think so. This is something that's argued about all the time, and there have been competitions behind curtains and which instrument sounds the best and so on. But I think the main difference between a great violin and a good violin and a not-so-good violin is not objective tone as it reaches an audience that's listening critically, but what it actually does for the performer himself in the heat of battle, to use Isaac Stern's phrase. And there's no question at all that the great old Italian instruments give you not only tremendous volume, but also tremendous variety in the type of sound that you can produce, a whole range of colours, and also that the carrying power of those instruments when played even pianissimo it'll reach the furthest point in the hall. And a less good instrument will not only perhaps not carry as well, but there's nuances which even if the violinist himself can hear them under the ear, by the time it gets out to the 15th row, it's all sounding the same. I've heard this time and again with new instruments, because there's no question that a new instrument can sound very satisfactory indeed to someone playing it. It will vibrate and resonate and have ample volume and so on. But show me a new instrument that will allow its nuances to carry in the way that a Stradivarius does, and I shall be very pleased indeed.